everyone. I'm Rabbi Joy Levitt, the Chief Executive Officer of the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Welcome to Vote 2021, a mayoral candidate forum hosted by the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan and the Forward. Tonight, we will hear from 8 leading candidates for mayor, each of whom brings a unique set of skills and experience to this race. I want to thank the candidates for joining us tonight and for their desire to serve our city in what has to be one of the toughest jobs in America. I should tell you that we have a very large crowd tonight, which is an indication of our community's interest in this race. It is our job as citizens to get to know you, your strengths and your challenges, your hopes and your dreams, and perhaps most importantly, your capacity to lead our city out of this pandemic and into a time of growth and equity for all of New York's residents. In the book of Jeremiah, it says, "Pray for the peace of our city, of your city, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." Jeremiah is not just calling on us to pray. He is calling us to care about our city and see its fate and its ability to meet the needs of all its citizens as inextricably linked to our own. As Jews and as New Yorkers, it is our responsibility to get involved, to play an active role in civic life, to get to know you, our candidates, and your views on the issues that matter most to us. And of course, to vote on June 22nd. This primary will be different because there will be ranked choice voting. JCC will be providing you in the coming weeks with more information about what this means. But put simply, it means that you'll be able to rank your top 5 candidates in order of your preference. This is being done to ensure that the winning candidate receives more than 50% of the vote when all is said and done, and avoid costly runoffs. So stay tuned for more information on ranked voting. Before we get started, I want to state explicitly that the JCC and the Forward are nonprofit organizations, and as such, cannot and will not make any endorsements in this race or any others. This forum is intended to be educational, and all candidates that met our inclusion criteria were invited to participate. As you may have seen in the news today, Lori Sutton has suspended her campaign and will not be joining us tonight, nor will Councilmember Carlos Menchaca be able to join us because of urgent council business. I want to take this opportunity to thank Cheryl Parker, the director of the Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility, and Austin Reed for bringing us together tonight, and for all the work that the center will do from now until Election Day to keep us focused and make sure that we all vote. Finally, all views expressed are those of the candidates and not of the JCC or the Forward. And now I'm honored to introduce my friend, our moderator for this evening, Jody Rudoran, who is the former Jerusalem Bureau Chief of the New York Times and the Editor-in-Chief of the Forward. All yours, Jody.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Levitt, for that nice introduction and the great table setting with the quote from Jeremiah, and for partnering with us on this forum. I'm thrilled to be here. This election is of enormous importance. Of course, the mayor of New York is always a major national figure, and with the challenges that we face right now, more than ever. As Ruth Messenger helped put this forum together, recently wrote in the Forward, the mayor of New York is also of particular significance to American Jews, and I'm just really excited. We've been covering this race intensely, where the Forward is very grateful to the Revson Foundation for a grant, which is helping us do that. And we have our senior politics reporter, Jacob Kornblue, who has been covering the race aggressively. We will be sharing some of his great stories about the candidates so far in the chat tonight. We've decided that I'm not going to be asking our candidates pointedly Jewish questions tonight. That is partly because in both Jacob's Stories and at a recent forum hosted by New York Jewish Agenda, several of these kinds of questions have already been asked and answered. And as I said, we'll be pasting links to those in the chat, which you'll also receive tomorrow in your email, along with a video of this forum. It's also because, as Joy so eloquently put it, civic engagement itself is a Jewish value, and because our city's 1.1 million Jews are just as concerned as everyone else about the broad range of challenges that face our next leaders. So we asked members of the audience to submit questions in advance, and we got some terrific ones, and those helped us focus on the topics of greatest importance right now to voters: the post-pandemic economic recovery, equity and diversity, racism and anti-Semitism, public safety, education, housing, and leadership style. When I was covering the 2000 presidential campaign for the New York Times, the best advice I got was from the legendary political reporter Adam Nagurney, who said that my job was just to give readers insights about how candidates would make decisions and manage problems, since we never really know what the problems or the issues are going to be. I hope tonight will leave you, our audience that is almost 700 and climbing, I hope it will leave you with a better sense of that about the 8 contenders that are with us. Before we get to the questions, I'm going to just walk through the format. We're going to start with each candidate giving a 60-second opening statement, during which we'll be posting into the chat their website and email address if you want to follow up. I will then ask 3 substantive questions, and each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer those questions. If necessary, after the initial responses, I may ask some follow-ups. Behind the scenes, we're going to be watching the time closely. Candidates will be notified via the chat when they have 10 seconds left, and again when they're at time. And if they go over, I have control of the mute button. After those 3 rounds, we've got some quick questions where each candidate will have 10 seconds to respond, and hopefully we'll have a little more time at the end for them to expand into a close, because we're not going to have closing statements. The order of the candidates has been randomly selected for each portion, each question, and rotates, to be fair. And we will share it with you in the chat before each question. As mentioned, and I think Maya Wiley posted into the chat, several of the candidates, Andrew Yang, Maya Wiley, Eric Adams, and Scott Stringer, have notified us recently that they are not going to be able to stay for our whole forum as we originally had planned. We're certainly disappointed about that, but we've decided not to adjust the program. So they'll answer what they have time for, and we'll continue on with our program. One more thing, don't forget, I'm hoping most of you are all registered to vote. You should tell your friends, though. You can register for the June 22nd primaries up through May 28th. And I want to just join Rabbi Levitt in thanking these incredible folks at the JCC who put this together: Cheryl and Austin, Joy and Ruth, and then tonight we have Matt and Sam handling the tech. As I said, I am going to let the candidates introduce themselves. So we're going to start right now. I think we're going to start with Ray McGuire, then Scott Stringer, then Sean Donovan, and then I'll announce the rest when we get there. So starting with you, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you very much for having me, Rabbi. I know the word. This has been a walk of faith, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. I love this city. It is where I met my wife and where we're raising our 3 children. Many of those days have been spent at the JCC. I have the lived experiences. I have the proven leadership skills, the management experience. I have led out of crisis, out of the depths of the financial crisis, to make sure that I attracted and recruited the best team. I've managed budgets that are often bigger than most state budgets. I've been able to pull different constituencies together, which is what's going to be needed today, given that our city is broke, it's broken and divided, and we can no longer survive being a divided city. I have a vision on which rests on 3 pillars. It's a vision for the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of this city. It is called Go Big, Go Small, Go Forward, which focuses on small businesses. The second pillar is one of safety and security. For far too long, we have witnessed the religious and racial hatred that is dividing this city. And it's based on the third pillar is one of education, which allows our kids and allows all New Yorkers to have a quality education so that they can get the same opportunities that I had. And I'm here only because of the sacrifices of my single mother and education. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to this evening with members of the community with whom I've had a long-standing relationship. Thank you for having me.
Go ahead, Mr. Stringer.
Well, thank you, Jody. Thank you, JCC. I remember when, before the JCC was built, it was a gas station. And as an assemblyman from the Upper West Side, I played a very small role in helping to move things along and create this magical institution. I didn't realize at the time that I would someday get married late in life and have 2 little kids who have enjoyed swimming, art, and my wife and I have enjoyed the amazing rooftop where the kids get to run around while we barely can walk around. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. And look, we're facing 3 crises at the same time. We have an economic crisis, we have a social justice crisis, and we have a real health crisis. And the next mayor has to have vision and skill to bring back this city in a way that we never thought we would have to deal with. This crisis is not the 2008 recession. It's not after 9/11. This is akin to the Great Depression. And part of what the next mayor has to do is reset the Albany relationship so that we can get the funding we need. I'm a former assembly member. I know how to do this. I worked with many of you when I was Manhattan Borough President. We've got to build our communities through the lens of community-based planning. And as controller, I've had the skills to pay the bills, but I've also audited the agencies. I know where we have to do better.
Right.
And what
I'm
we
sorry to interrupt you, but you're at time. It turns out I don't have keys to the mute button, so I'm going to interrupt. Just want to keep the room moving and keep it fair. So, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you, JCC. I'm the son of an immigrant who came to this city and found success, but I want to be mayor because I grew up in this city at a different time of crisis when so many around me were not finding the same opportunity. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw the South Bronx burning, so many communities in central Brooklyn and other places crumbling to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. I came back after school, after hearing about a remarkable group of churches and congregations, synagogues and mosques. And we rebuilt based on the biblical figure Nehemiah, who rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. We built more than 5,000 homes that helped uplift communities around this city. That began a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness that became me housing commissioner in the wake of 9/11, housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes for President Obama. When Sandy hit our shores, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort. And then he asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget. And 3 weeks later, Ebola hit. And we helped.
Wait, what happened? Did we you were at Mr. Donovan was also.
I guess you do have the mute button now.
I guess I got the mute button back. I apologize I'm sorry, but really let's try to keep to time, especially because we have people leaving early. So I've lost my list now, but I believe it's Diane Morales next.
Yes, thanks so much.
Great. Sorry, I'm gonna find it. We're gonna be fine here. I know it's problems. I appreciate it.
Don't worry about it. You can find it after we'll be all right.
All right, great. So we're gonna go Diane Morales, Andrew Yang, Catherine Garcia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, JCC. Thank you, the Forward, and everyone else that has joined us this evening. My name's Diane Morales. I am a first-generation Puerto Rican, born and raised in Bed-Stuy to a working-class family. I'm also a single mother who raised her 2 children in that same community while successfully serving others for over 25 years as an executive and leader of human service organizations, providing education, access to jobs and career pathways, and stable housing to our most vulnerable New Yorkers. Through all of this, I've experienced failed systems, but also the hope of our communities. And it's that combination that led me to enter this race. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic compounded the pre-existing pandemics of racism and poverty that already plague so many New Yorkers. The problem is not money. The problem is our priorities. The next mayor has to have a clear vision in defending and protecting everyone's human rights. I am running for mayor because my entire career has centered those who our so-called democracy has failed. I'm conscious of time. Yes.
So far, you're doing the best on time, Mr. Yang.
Thank you, JCC. Thank you, Forward. It's great to be here. I was on the Upper West Side earlier today. It was a beautiful sunny spring day. It felt like the New York of old, but we know that our city is badly wounded. We are down 27,000 lives, 600,000 jobs, 60 million tourists, 82% of commuters, and 300,000 New Yorkers have left the city, including, I know, many people that you know. These are not political problems. These are operational problems. What we have to do is try and restart the engine of our economy as quickly as possible. I came here to New York as a 21-year-old law student, but I ended up the owner and operator of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US. It was actually founded by a Jewish gentleman, my business partner, Zeke Vanderhook. I have the right blend of operational experience and political relationships in DC to make sure that we get this city on our feet as soon as possible.
Thank you. Catherine Garcia.
Thank you, JCC, and thank you to the Forward. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I am a born and bred Brooklynite, sorry, for those of you from Manhattan, who loves this city. Sorry, Siri's getting me. And I chose to raise my children here. I was born into a multiracial family. I was adopted, as were 2 of my siblings. And so being a white woman who had 2 Black siblings, I saw diversity in all of its power at the dinner table, but also the downside of that, of how we were often treated differently. But I have a real vision, and you know that I have the skills to get the job done, because I've been doing it for the city of New York for the last 14 years, whether or not that was delivering food during COVID, plowing snow, delivering your water. I've done it all. I know how to make the city work for New Yorkers, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you. And our last 2 for the openers, Eric Adams and then Maya Wiley.
Thank you so much. And think about where we are right now. This is a city where a plane can fly into a building and take down our center of trade, or it can crash on the Hudson River. The uncertainty of marches where peaceful people can be embedded with those who want to burn down and destroy our cities. No one else that's running for office has lived that life of uncertainty but had to respond but me. For 22 years as a police officer, sergeant, lieutenant, and captain, I had to protect this city and respond to the uncertainties in real time. I can do it again, and I know what this city needs. We're still under a terrorist threat. So anyone that thinks that they can run this city based on just being an accountant is wrong. This is a complicated place, and I think this is an Esther 4:14 moment. God made me for such a time like this.
Ms. Wiley.
Thank you. And because of the words of Rabbi Levitt, I also thought of the book of Nehemiah, because our proverbial walls, the walls of Jerusalem, have fallen. They fell before COVID because of our unaffordability. They fell because of systemic racism. They have fallen now thanks to COVID. They are in shambles, but we also have a spiritual exhaustion that comes from all these things we haven't solved. And I, as the child of civil rights activists, as someone who spent my early days at Freedom Seders, because there's so much that can unite us and does, but became a civil rights lawyer and racial justice advocate, spending 25 years fighting for everything from fair school funding to access to health care, and went into City Hall, the only candidate who actually has served in that very hot kitchen. That is City Hall, getting free broadband to every single apartment at Queensbridge houses, something that had never been done before, but for such a
Sorry, I'm gonna call time on that too. Sorry. So before we get into the first question, I want to just remind the audience, and we now have more than 750 of you on here. It's amazing. We're thrilled to have you. I see that a lot of you are posting questions in the Q&A. And so I just want to remind you that we aren't going to be using public questions tonight. We just have to keep a very rigid time clock. But the questions I'm going to be asking are all based on questions that members of the public did submit to us as they signed up. So don't post questions in the Q&A. I know I did see one in there. What's the YouTube channel we're broadcasting on? So if Matt could get that into the chat so people can follow that, that'd be great. And if we see anything in there that is a technical question, we'll try to respond. But we are going to move now to our questions. And once again, the order will be pasted into the chat. So our first question is about COVID recovery. Pandemic has hit the city so hard. As Andrew Yang just cited off a bunch of statistics, I have a few of my own. The Partnership for New York City has estimated that 1/3 of the city's small businesses have closed. Of course, Broadway's been shuttered for a year. Commercial real estate has never had a dimmer prognosis. Large firms are downsizing, anticipating more remote work, and unemployment's over 12%. Some neighborhoods feel like ghost towns, leading to headlines like New York is not dead, but it's on life support, I think was recently in The Guardian. So the next mayor will have no bigger or more complicated task than reviving our economy and making New York again. How will you do that and ensure that it happens equitably rather than worsening the racial and economic divides that were exposed and often deepened by this year of pandemic? First up, Ray McGuire.
Thank you for having me.
Remind you of 90 seconds now, and you will get cued on the time in the chat. Sorry, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. My plan outlines the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of the city. No city, no jobs, no dignity, no city. My growth plan has 3 prongs to it. The first prong is a stimulus, jumpstart small businesses. The second is a transformation of our approach to business. I want to make New York City the best place in the world to start and run a business. The third is infrastructure that creates jobs and addresses the urgent priorities. 500,000 jobs. Together, these components make up my plan to go big, go small, go forward. Stimulus, 1, wage subsidy, 50% subsidy for 50,000 jobs, small businesses. A New York City sales tax waiver, waiving the permit fee. We need to use federal funds to kickstart the economy. We're getting $5 to $6 billion from the government. We need to keep cost-saving measures in place. Also, we need to make certain that we go back to previous spending and we'll burn through the money and have little to show for it once it's gone. So we need to be mindful of that. The other is transformation. Small businesses, treat small businesses as customers. Red tape commission to cut through the bureaucracy. Shot clock to make certain we have the right permits. Then I want to have a deputy mayor, which gets to the inclusive part for MWBEs. And then I want to focus on infrastructure. Housing, senior rental, broadband access, repair bridges and parks and subway elevators. Go big, go small, go forward. 500,000 jobs to restart this economy.
Thank you. Catherine Garcia.
Thank you. And so I recently released my plan to reopen, to stay open, because small businesses are at the heart of what makes New York, New York. And that means ensuring that we have space for art and culture and restaurants, and opening up much of our public space to that more than we've already done, eliminating the bureaucratic nonsense, and also creating a crowdsourced fund seeded by the city, but in partnership with the private sector, to ensure that we are doing microloans to small businesses. And we think that $5 million would be enough for 5,000 businesses. But we know that we need Broadway back. We know that we need art back, because when that comes back, then office employees comes back, then tourism comes back. But we have to go further than that, because we know that people need a good first job, and we have not leveraged our CUNY system or our trade schools to ensure that we are giving our young people paid internships and good first jobs. I will do that when I am mayor. But we do need to be making long-term investments, and this will put people back to work, particularly around climate change. It's not going away. California burned, Texas froze. We are 500 miles of coastline, and we need to be making those investments today, particularly in a zero rate interest rate environment. But I have a long-term vision to ensure that.
Okay, Scott Stringer.
Thank you. In April, at the height of the pandemic, my mom died of COVID in a Bronx hospital. And it was that night that the doctor and I had a conversation about COVID. And he said, though your mom's death is truly a tragedy for you, you have to understand that she was 86 years old with pre-existing health conditions, and no one wants to lose a parent. But you have to understand that in the Bronx, the people who are coming in dying from COVID were Black at the age of 50, Latino at the age of 40, people who for so long suffered from type 2 diabetes and asthma and pre-existing health conditions that were so serious. The truth is, our government never really intended to solve the health disparities in our communities, especially communities of color, but it was all about just managing people's health. And COVID became the great discriminator. And that is why when we come back from COVID, we have got to look at this city much differently. We're going to have to invest in communities hit hardest by ending the disparities in health, by investing more in community-based clinics and more doctors from the community. We're going to have to start talking honestly about how we close some of the social justice challenges, police reform, and how we can create more fairer cities, better justice. And we're going to have to build, finally, the kind of affordable housing, low-income housing, that's going to move people from homeless shelters into supportive housing. These are not easy challenges, but we cannot accept the status quo. COVID came hard, it came fast, and we're going to need a mayor who has the skills.
I'm sorry to have to use the mute button. Please try to keep to time. Deanne Morales.
Thank you. So, all these plans for recovery are great, but the reality of it is that there is no recovery without the people of New York City. And so we first have to prioritize, in fact, preserving the lives of the Black and Brown communities that have made it possible for the city to operate and that continue to put their lives on the line. If that means paying people to stay home so that we can get the pandemic under control, then that is what we need to do. We need to ensure that those who we need to have working on the front lines are protected and also have access to the vaccine. Once we do that, we can start talking about real recovery. And the recovery for New York City moving forward should be grounded in dignity, in care, and in solidarity. In dignity by ensuring everyone has access to housing, because we know that you cannot extract public safety or public health from access to housing. That includes also investing in our communities by keeping them safe and defunding the police, divesting and investing. Care by investing in our small and mid-sized businesses so that we can rebuild the economy from the inside out. And solidarity by focusing on growing the local economy through a wealth tax, through public banking, and increased accountability in terms of land use and development. Those are the things we need to do in order to really get back on our feet.
Thank you. Maya Wiley.
So I'm going to start with what's real. Audia, a woman in Brooklyn, travels 4 hours two there, two back to get to a man in a wheelchair she takes care of every day, COVID or no COVID, sunshine or snowstorms. And she's a lucky one because she has a job with benefits and she makes minimum wage. But here's the thing. She stands in a food pantry line twice a week. And the jobs we've lost in the city, so many of them, but we have to recognize who's also been hit hardest. So I have a plan called New Deal New York, and we will create 100,000 new jobs by spending $10 billion in capital construction. That is a plan I can execute it as mayor with no agreement from Albany and no need for dollars from DC. And that gets us running again. And I will have a New Deal czar that will speed up projects so that they are stimulative. But here's the other thing. We know we need public safety to bring us back, and to do it in a way that meets our values means that we recognize street homelessness is a mental health crisis, is an addiction services crisis, but we can use our subsidies differently so that we're getting folks into housing with supportive services. That is going to be critically important to our sense of spiritual well-being and to attracting people back, attracting tourists back, our quality of life. And we're going to have a caring economy plan, including $5,000 into the pockets of 100,000 of the neediest families so they can care for themselves, but also create.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go to Andrew Yang.
Thank you. So there are three major causes of our economic problems right now. You have to tackle each one in turn. Number one, 82% of people are not commuting into New York City. And that is not just those workers, that's the security guards, the cleaning staff, the food truck operators, the retailers. I talk to CEOs all the time. They badly want people back in New York. So the way we get people back is, one, get the vaccine out as quickly as possible. But number two, you need a way to verify you've been vaccinated so you can go into the office building and just be in the elevator. And the inspiration should come from Israel. They're ahead of us on the vaccination curve. And you know what they're doing? They're giving everyone who's been vaccinated a bracelet. So you can walk into that building confidently, just show your bracelet. If it's not the bracelet, then it's going to be a smartphone app that just says, I'm vaccinated, and then you can go back to the office. This will allow CEOs to reopen their organizations. Number two, we are missing 60 million tourists who supported 300,000 jobs. The message that right now people have of New York City is people banging pots and pans to thank essential workers. We need to send a very different set of messages that New York City is open for tourism, open for business. Broadway will be open this fall, but we have to invest in a way we have not before. And the third thing is that small businesses right now are falling apart. We need to reopen those storefronts and create pop-up retail and pop-up restaurants to frankly get our streets welcoming again so people feel like New York City is open for business.
Thank you. Next, Sean Donovan.
Thanks so much. There are 4 things we need to do to bring this city back after COVID. First, we have to implement my safest city plan that would ensure we have every piece of technology, all the vaccinations, all the steps in place to make sure we're the safest city in the world, and to broadcast to the world so New Yorkers come back, so tourists come back. Why should you trust I can do this? Because I'm the only candidate who's sat side by side with Dr. Fauci solving a global epidemic. Second, we need to implement my plan to create 500,000 jobs in this city, beginning with our small businesses, our restaurants, bringing our arts and culture back. Why should you trust I could do this? Because I worked side by side with Mayor Bloomberg in the wake of 9/11 and President Obama to recover from the Great Recession. And I'm the only one who has that experience to rebuild an economy after crisis. We've got to rebuild our budget. And no one in this race has the experience I do, overseeing a $4 trillion budget and recovering from the worst budget deficit since World War II that President Obama faced when he took office. And finally, we need an equitable recovery. We need to implement my plan to create the first ever chief equity officer reporting directly to the mayor, which I would do on day one. And second, to build 15-minute neighborhoods. What's a 15-minute neighborhood? Well, you, like me, who grew up in Manhattan, know that you have everything you need within 15 minutes of your front door. A great school for your kids, a job that supports.
I have to cut you off. You know, 15 seconds to tell about the 15-minute neighborhood. Eric Adams is our last on this question.
First of all, I adore you that you have a mute button because my colleagues just can't stay within the time limit, but I bring my own stop clock and I'm going to give each one of them one of them. So we need to do a series of things. Number one, we must get COVID under control. Let's open our office spaces, clear regulations from the city and state so we won't have frivolous lawsuits if a person contracts COVID while they're in their office space. Number two, we must get crime under control. And that includes hate crimes that we're seeing spiking in our Chinese community, our Jewish community, our LGBTQ communities. We must get it under control, and we must get gun violence under control. I will reinstitute the anti-crime unit, turn it into an anti-gun unit, and do precision policing around gun violence and go after gang violence to communicate with gang members. This is a new day in our city. We're not going to have countless number of shootings and violence that we're seeing. Number three, we have to say we're open to business. We had a sign, welcome to the Empire State. We've destroyed that. The bureaucracy, the inability of government to ensure that businesses are here and available is unacceptable in the city. And lastly, we have to have an equitable opening that everyone benefits from what this city has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate the compliment. It is quite odd muting people. I apologize. It's a little harsh, but I've been told we have to keep it tight. And I know the audience appreciates when everybody's getting the fair equal amount of time. So for question 2, we're going to post the order in the chat so you know when you're up. As many of you just discussed, you are looking to be the leader of maybe the most diverse places on earth. One of the most diverse places on earth. It's a diversity that everyone here prizes and celebrates, but it's also a city that has been plagued by racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, and other hate speech and violence, and a place where different groups are too often pitted against each other for resources, for access to elite schools, and generally in political races like the one we're in now. So I want you to each talk about the specific experiences in your work life or personal life that will inform your approach to leading this polyglot city in a more constructive way than we have seen in the past. Andrew Yang.
Thank you for this question. It's been a devastating and painful time for the Asian American community. Eric mentioned the surges in violence. I talked to an Asian worker who was just assaulted on the street for no reason other than his race. Hurt people hurt other people. And again, this is a badly wounded city. So you're seeing acts of hatred and violence rise against every group, whether Jewish, Asian, LGBTQ. So the goal has to be to try and knit together the fabric of our city as quickly as possible. I'd be very proud to be the first Asian American mayor of New York City. And I think that my experience is of trying to avoid the zero-sum games that, as you said, have defined city politics for so many for so long. As one example, when you talk about the folks fighting over selective high schools, I proposed opening 2 new selective high schools in each borough so that there are educational options that people are excited about closer to where they live. It's that kind of approach that we need to take as quickly as possible, because the fact is this city's recovery is not assured. If we do have a negative spiral, you'll see acts of violence go up, you'll see insecurity rise, you'll see more people leave the city. This is what we have to avert as quickly as possible. So I'm going to invest in growth, in being pro-business, pro-development, to try and preserve the opportunity of New York City for everyone in New York of any background.
Thank you. And Eric Adams is back.
Thank you. I recall a Polish woman coming to me about 2 years ago, and she had an article in her bag. She was crying. She was unable to speak English, but through her interpreter, she showed the article. Her son was killed during the 90s. And it was an article of me standing up for her son and talking about how horrific it was, and actually putting out a reward of my money to find the persons who were responsible. This issue is not new to me. Diversity is key. And earlier, 1.5 years ago, I created Breaking Bread, Building Bonds, 100 dinners around the city, 10 individuals at each dinner. Each person comes from a different ethnic background or cultural background, because the reality is we don't talk to each other. We don't communicate with each other. We don't know our neighbors. Although we are a diverse city, we still live in silos. We do not lean into the beauty and the discomfort that comes with interacting with each other. I believe let's visit a mosque, a synagogue, a Baptist church, a Buddhist temple. Let's tear down these walls and show our babies how we can live in a city as diverse as New York. I call Brooklyn the Tel Aviv of America. I have the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. And that's the same with my Chinese population, Caribbean population, African Americans. We are better than what we're showing our children.
Thank you. I know a lot of people in Tel Aviv talk about the Brooklyn to the Mediterranean. So Maya Wiley, 90 seconds to you.
You know, I'm the child of civil rights activists, was a Black father and a white mother that got married when it was still illegal in most states. And it is not a theoretical question, because I also have a partner who is the son of a Holocaust survivor, and in a city that we love because of its diversity, raising 2 kids who are in an interfaith family. And we have seen a exponential rise in anti-Semitism, in Islamophobia. Yes, just as Andrew said, an appalling rise of hate crimes against Asian residents. And what is so true is for Black folks, anti-Black violence, and also our immigrant communities, that has been a reality of life even before Donald Trump was president. And I do point to him because it does matter what leaders say. And we have seen a stoking of blame game and finger pointing, and who our leaders are matters. For me, as someone who spent my whole career as a civil rights lawyer and racial justice advocate, but also who worked in City Hall with with our Commission on Human Rights that reported directly to me, having served on the Board of Human Rights as well, that this is about taking strong steps and measures on enforcement, ensuring that we are having a presence where we need it to protect folks, but a leadership that will create bridges and create bridges across community. But if we do not integrate, if we do not think of housing integration, school integration as a solution to what ails us, we are missing the boat, and I will pay attention to that. But I also want to say
you're at time. Next up, Ray McGuire.
You know, my entire life has been a life of integration and leading in integration and bringing communities together. From the time I was in the 6th grade, when I got bused to school, to the time I left the 11th grade in that school, where I was president of the school, to the time I came east to test myself against the big boys and girls in the east, where I became one of the leaders of the school, to the time I went to college, where I've integrated some of the institutions that up to that point had not been integrated, to the time I've come to New York, and in New York have led in a business where I was a sole brother, but made certain I wasn't the SOLE brother, and led in places that they didn't have people who looked like me leading. So I was able to develop the relationships and develop the respect so that I could manage and I can lead in the world of business. And in the world of arts education, culture, and arts, I've been involved in not only integrating many of our outstanding institutions, but not only integrating them, but leading them in arts, in education, in the world of economy, in criminal justice. So I've been on the forefront of integrating, and if there's a person here who's had the history of having integrated different communities, it's me. And I've prayed at the Wailing Wall, I've walked the Via Dolorosa, I've been to the Dome of the Rock. I know what culture is, and if there's anybody who can bring us together, it's me.
Thank you. Scott Stringer.
You know, as a citywide elected official for 8 years, I've had the opportunity and experience to visit in every one of our neighborhoods and any one of our diverse communities. And what always struck me about the best part of this city is when one group is attacked, I have always been able to go to events and unity rallies with the entire community. When the Muslim community is attacked, the Jewish community, the Asian community, the African American community stand strong. When the African American community is strong, everybody attacked, everybody else rallies. That's the beauty about our city. And what we have to do as the next mayor is start to actually solve some of these issues by investing in communities that have struggled. And the next mayor is going to have to bring childcare to people who are struggling because they don't have opportunities to be in the workforce. And I have a plan for that. We have to build integrated housing, but you have to do it with a plan. And my housing plan, I believe, will integrate neighborhoods from the Upper West Side to throughout the city, and we should do that. I also have a plan to make sure that as we think about jobs and justice, we cannot just accept the fact that Wall Street executives made bank during the pandemic, $38 billion in profits, while our small businesses and communities of color were hit by COVID. We have got to change the paradigm up in the status quo, but it has to be done with plans and programs, and it has to be specific. And then you need a mayor on day one who's going to actually be able to implement this. The problem with this administration is it was a lot of talk, but not a lot of bank. And I believe that it's time to do that with specific plans that I hope we can talk about tonight.
Great. And our last three for this question, Sean Donovan, Dion Morales, and Catherine Garcia.
My life has been shaped by the experience of my father, an immigrant who grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, spoke Spanish before English, and was beaten up as a child because his grandparents were Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish. My life has been shaped by meeting John Lewis 30 years ago when I was a student, and retraced the route of the Freedom Rides to understand the stories of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, and so many other civil rights leaders who came from Jewish communities and fought for voting rights in the South. My life has been shaped by working side by side with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, rabbis, and so many other religious leaders in the East Brooklyn congregations to rebuild communities after devastating crisis. And that's why when I had the chance to lead in President Obama's cabinet, I was the first cabinet secretary in history to endorse marriage equality and made path-breaking steps to ensure that we gave transgender and other Americans rights they had never been given before. And it's why I led the way to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In fact, that work earned me the attacks of President Trump when he still had a Twitter account last year, attacking Joe Biden for trying to destroy the suburbs, because I had tried to make sure that every Black and brown American could live wherever they choose.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. So I wanted to start off by saying that my intention is to be the mayor for all of New York City and for all New Yorkers. That means being committed to protecting all New Yorkers and recognizing the fact that we've had Proud Boys marching in our streets, we've had a Confederate flag at the Jewish Museum, and that we've seen real targeted anti-Semitism, xenophobia, anti-Blackness, and all of that is rooted in white supremacy and oppression. And so the only way for us to stand together and to move forward is through redefining and rebuilding community safety with each other and standing in solidarity. And I have experience doing that. It's reflected in my leadership team right now for this campaign, where I've got Asian staffers, I've got African staffers, I've got a DACA student, I've got, everybody under the sun, quite frankly. And the way that we move together is by leading through example and recognizing the roots that tie us together. And that no matter what divisive tactics might be being used in order to attempt to separate us, to divide and conquer us, that we all come from a common oppressor, and recognizing that and moving forward together. And that is what I will do as mayor for all New Yorkers.
Thank you. Last on this question, Catherine Garcia.
Thank you. And the first thing you have to do, and what I will do, and I am mayor, is to speak out sharply against anti-Semitism, against the American Asian violence that has been going on, and make sure that we have protection within all of our communities. But as I said before, I was born and raised in a multiracial family. My children are also half Latino. And so we have seen personally as a family the beauty of diversity. But one of the real challenges is we often have a conversation that's about scarcity, that's about scarce educational resources, scarce housing, scarce economic opportunity. And these are real things that a mayor can change and bring people together. Over the summer, when we were distributing 200 million meals, I saw communities of all stripes coming out and supporting their neighbors, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their religion. I saw Orthodox food pantries serving Caribbean food to people in central Brooklyn. I know that we can come together. I have done this in the roles that I have played, and I know that makes New York City great.
Thank you very much. So we are at our third round of questions with 90 seconds for each of you. And as we spoke about earlier, we got all sorts of questions from audience members, including issues about where the 91st Street subway station should be located. We decided not to ask that one, but there's a consensus that based on the audience questions, our own knowledge of the city, I think that the top concerns of voters right now are public safety, education, and housing. And I know that each of you could speak for an hour on each of these three questions, and you've probably done so at other forums. We're going to ask you to pick one and talk about it. On public safety, we have calls to defund the police, to radically transform the department's makeup and approach the people it serves, for and against bail reform. Meanwhile, we have parents across the city who are desperate for schools to fully reopen, and there remain deep questions about why the system remains so stratified and especially why elite high schools still have so few students of color. There is also, of course, deep fear right now about what it feels like an expanding crisis of people in the city who do not have homes, and anger at the hotels that were used to shelter them during the pandemic. There have been decades of increasing gentrification and stratification that made many New York neighborhoods unaffordable for the middle class, the working class. So, aware that you are going to have to juggle and balance these three and many other issues if you are elected, please pick just one and give us your very specific action plan of how you're going to address that issue in your first 100 days in office. Again, public safety, education, or housing, first 100 days, starting with Scott Stringer.
Look, tonight, 60,000 people are going to sleep in homeless shelters, half for children. And there's another 500,000 people that are one step away from homelessness. We see homeless people living on the streets, and government just puts its hands up in the air and can't act. I think the next mayor has to come into office and on day one, put a housing plan in place that will upend the status quo. My plan would be to access 1,000 vacant city-owned parcels of land, redirect the luxury development subsidy to a subsidy that would encourage the development of low-income housing on those properties, pass a land bank, land trust to manage those properties, and build the 40,000 low-income housing units we need to move homeless individuals, especially working homeless individuals, who can leave shelter and go into real housing. This must be done. This wasn't done under Bloomberg or de Blasio, and we have to do it now. We have gone from spending $1.6 billion on managing the homeless crisis to $3.2 billion, and we have nothing to show for it. So it's time to redirect, and it's time to be bold. And the other thing we have to do is when we have new construction, we have to set aside 25% of that new construction for affordable housing. The need is that great. And lastly, we keep talking about solving the homeless crisis, but we never talk about building the homes that are needed. And as mayor, I will implement this plan and build the 10,000 units per year we need. And I did this under my time. I am getting better.
Thank you so much, Scott. Sean.
Thank you. So I too want to talk about housing as Scott did. And this is rooted for me in growing up in this city and asking myself, how can it be that we allow our neighbors in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country on earth to sleep on our streets? And I'm reminded of those days walking the streets in New York today. We need to do 4 big things to solve this problem. And no one in this race has the deep experience in housing and the leadership to be able to do this. First, we need to make sure that we keep people in their homes. We are on the verge of the greatest eviction crisis this city has seen because of COVID. And so we need a mayor who can work effectively with President Biden, with Vice President Harris, to get the resources we need to keep people in their homes. And we must provide the help that all New Yorkers need, the housing counseling, the legal assistance to stay in their homes. Second, we have to preserve the housing that we have. Public housing serves more people than live in Atlanta, Georgia, and we've never treated it like the precious resource it is. I have a specific plan to get the $40 billion we need from Washington, but also from the city budget to solve that challenge and make sure public housing is decent and safe. I have a comprehensive plan to build more affordable housing and to ask every neighborhood to share in that burden. And then finally, we need to solve homelessness. I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually dramatically reduced homelessness. In fact, in more than 80 cities and states, when I led the strategy for President Obama, we ended veteran homelessness, not reduced it, but ended it. We can do that here too.
Thank you. Diane.
So as a parent who has watched both of my children be pepper sprayed and then shortly thereafter, my son be physically assaulted by the NYPD, I have called for the need for us to redefine and reclaim the definition of public safety and recognize that, in fact, armed officers do not result in safer communities. And so I've called for the defunding of the police by $3 billion because I think it is time for us to reinvest in communities, in the services and programs that actually contribute to creating safe communities. And those are things like housing, mental health services, access to healthcare, access to jobs, and quality education. And we need to reinvest in those things. The other thing we know is that a significant percentage of the calls that the NYPD responds to are not, in fact, crimes in progress. They are social issues and situations like the ones that I have described. And so I've called for the creation of a community first responders department that would, in fact, be able to intervene and de-escalate in those types of situations and connect people to the types of services and programs that they need in order to be able to transcend those circumstances as part of a larger ecosystem that would connect with community-based organizations, with clinics, with human service organizations, and really be able to help people move forward rather than continue to perpetuate the cycle of the social vulnerabilities that people experience.
Thank you. Right.
You know, education is what got me here. Without education, I would not have been able to have the kinds of successes that I've been fortunate to have. Today, our city, and long before COVID, our city was in an economic crisis. Today, it's an economic crisis, which has been exacerbated by the fact that many of our kids have no access to broadband. They have no access to tablets. And so my plan is called Cradle to Career, Cradle to Job. And I want to start early. I want to start pre-K is good, but many of our kids arrive at pre-K and they're already behind. So I want to start at 0 and go to 4. And what's included in there, I want to have affordable child care and affordable parent care. And if you look at the stimulus package, it's allowed for some of that today. Why is that? Because as we know, between 0 and the end of the 3rd grade, our children are learning to read. After that, they're reading to learn. So I want to hold it. I want to be held accountable for making certain that every child in the 3rd grade in New York City can read, and that he or she doesn't leave the 3rd grade without being able to read. And then I want to make certain that each of our kids, beginning of the 6th grade, gets exposed to a job, a summer job, so they can see what the possibilities are. So by the time they graduate, they will be able to read and communicate in this society effectively, and they'll have been exposed to opportunities. So they can go to their job or their career, or to go to a 2 or 4 year college. That's my responsibility, and we need to solve this crisis today.
Thank you, Catherine.
My focus is really on ensuring public safety for all of our neighbors, no matter who they are, because we know we can't grow the economy without people feeling safe in those communities. And I have the experience, having run a uniform agency, to change the culture, because we can have safety with respect. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have to. We have to ensure that we are fighting crime, that we are nipping this uptick in shootings in the bud, that we are nipping this anti-Semitic and hate crime against Asian Americans in the bud, but at the same time, using different tactics. If you're talking about someone who is mentally ill on the subway, and embedding a mental health professional with the police department, but also do some practical things. Increase the age of recruits to 25. Ensure that they live within the city. But how you really fundamentally rebuild trust is you have to increase transparency. People need to know that there is justice for police when bad things happen, and that they know about it. So I am very pleased with the fact that disciplinary records have been released so people see them. We can do both. We can have safety and we can have respect.
Thank you, everyone. I agree with Catherine that there's going to be no economic recovery if we don't feel safe in our own streets. And we all can feel it. It's the reason why some of our friends have left New York, and it is real. Violent crime is up 94%. Anti-Asian violence is up 900% to the extent that we have numbers for that. I personally had run-ins with folks on the streets of New York just in the last number of days. So the question is, how do we restore that feeling of stability and security that we've all enjoyed for so long? A couple of things that I want to say about police accountability. The civil rights abuses in the NYPD are very real. We need to reform the culture. I propose having a civilian head of the police as a commissioner. And I agree that we need to have police officers living in New York City because they would understand the communities that they serve and protect better. Frankly, you'd have them commuting within the city, and then you'd have hundreds of off-duty police officers on our streets, which would be very, very positive. We already require this of employees of other city agencies that are frankly not as important as police officers. Another reason why we do not feel safe in the way that we used to is that street homelessness has reached a nearly unprecedented level in New York City. I have pledged to reduce street homelessness by more than 50% in my first term. And right now, the level of street homelessness we're seeing, it's not inevitable. It's a failure of policy and leadership. If we invest the right resources, we can make our streets feel safe for ourselves and our families. Thank you. I have to leave a little bit early tonight, but appreciate this opportunity so much. Thank you, JCC.
You're on mute. I'm not sure if you said something. I couldn't hear you if you did. Did you call my name?
I sure did. And I also mentioned that, thank you for saying I was on mute. I also mentioned that Maya Wiley did have to leave. She said goodbye in the chat. So you're next up.
Thank you very much. And I too have to depart. We have so many forums that we try to fit in. But education, I agree with Ray. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has a quote, and I'm paraphrasing him. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. And many of these issues we're dealing with is a downstream approach. And we just have education wrong. And it is a real crime in this city that 65% of Black children do not reach proficiency every year, not 1 year, but every year. It's a crime that 30% of the young people on Rikers Island are dyslexic, and their parents, when they try to get a support and assistance, they have to sue the city first. And if they don't have legal means and the wherewithal, their children go without. And so we need to redefine education. It is not K through 12. It is pregnancy through profession. If that mother's not receiving the right nutrition, the right support, that child could be born with irreversible learning disabilities. And so as the mayor, I'm going to really focus on from pregnancy to profession and ensure we incorporate our business communities and ensure we give our teachers what they need to train our children.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We are going to move on to our lightning round, but we'll give actually each candidate 15 seconds each. I think we have a little extra time since we've had people leave. So we have a few quick questions. Some of them you may be able to answer just in a couple of seconds. And we hope these questions will help give our audience insight into who you are as people and as leaders and how you might make decisions in the future. So the first one is just, what is the most recent book that you have read? And you can say a couple words about it. So Catherine Garcia.
Oh, I don't know when the last time I actually got to read a full book was. But I think it's like, what was I reading? I guess I was reading Aaron Brockovich's book most recently because I got that one for my birthday, which was a few days ago. But I spent a lot of time on Zoom.
Happy birthday, and on to Ray McGuire.
Hi, the last book I have read is the reprint of the great series, The Sweet Fly Paper of Life, written by Langston Hughes and Roy DeCarava, which chronicles the richness of Harlem. And if you ever get the opportunity to read that book and look at the images and look at how Langston and Roy have come together, that's the richness of the culture. That is the beauty of New York City. That's the epitome of architectural and cultural genius. So I've read that, and I have that, and so that's the last one I've been able to get through, but it enriches me, and such a great book.
Thank you. Scott Stringer.
I was able to pick up a book, a biography of Bella Abzug, who was my cousin, and I've been slowly reading it during the course of the campaign. And I was a 12-year-old kid working for Bella's congressional race, and it was a time when my mom was also running for city council. Women back then had a real uphill struggle running for office, not unlike today, but it was even worse back then. And what I really was struck by the book was that Bella's time was building the foundation for the elected officials that I would come to work with and respect. The new state senators who are now in Albany, who I supported, Ruth Messenger, I've worked with for so many years. And I realized it started back then when I was a little kid giving out literature for Bella, and it's a great book. People
So at the next forum, you'll be showing up with a hat, I assume, and we'll look forward to that. Sean, last book.
I'm looking forward to that, Scott.
I think that we should have a hat for him. What is your hat? I think we should do that.
Jody, it could be a career ender or
take off. You take off.
No.
Well, from a funny subject to a serious one, I've been reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and I fell in love with her work. The last book she wrote about the Great Black Migration, which helped me understand the powerful, powerful ways that it has shaped not just our cities and our housing and our neighborhoods, but all of our social policy and the work we've done in this country for the last 100 years. This book broadens it to understand not just racism against African Americans, but against all Americans. And in this moment when we've just suffered through 4 years of Donald Trump as president, I would recommend it to all of you. Everyone should.
One of the proudest points on my resume is that I was the Chicago bureau chief of the Times, which was a job that Isabel also held. So I appreciate that answer. Diane.
So I am and have been reading for quite a bit, The Black Friend by my dear friend and New York Times bestselling author, Frederick Joseph, on being a better white person. It's taking me a while to get through it, but it is beautifully written. And Frederick just got his second deal for his next book that he's writing with his fiance. I highly recommend it. It is, very, very timely, needless to say.
Excellent. So for these questions, I'm going to just rotate the order. We'll just do Ray first for the next one. Ray, Scott, Sean, Diane, Catherine. And this is, I'm going to go to a super easy one, I think. What is the app you could least live without, or your favorite app on your phone? Ray.
My favorite app on my phone is probably the Call app.
What's the Call app? What does it do? Oh, just using the phone? Yeah. I don't even think that's an app, but okay, great. Scott.
I like all the newspaper apps, Times, Daily News, Post.
Just going straight for the journalist's heart. Sean.
It's a life.
So I have 21 and 19-year-old boys, so I'd have to say it's not my favorite, but I check my banking app most often.
I thought it was going to be the Find My iPhone to follow them or whatever, the tracking app. Diane.
I have to admit that right now, the app I have the most fun with is actually TikTok. My daughter runs my campaign TikTok account, and it's quite popular and it's kind of fun.
That's my daughter's favorite app too. Catherine.
Oh no, I think I'm still an Instagrammer. So, I like to actually see what everyone's doing, though I did find out from someone when I was like, oh my goodness, that vacation looked phenomenal back when people traveled. He's like, oh no, I was with my in-laws the whole time. It was just terrible. So it doesn't always tell you the truth. But I do enjoy it.
Okay, so slightly more serious question now. What habit or hobby have you developed during the pandemic that you hope to keep hold of and stay with you once it's over? Anything new you've been doing that you want to keep doing? Scott.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's a hobby. It's the reality when I'm not in this mayor's race, which is managing remote learning for my 9-year-old and 7-year-old. And I'm not doing the job I want to do there. And I really hope that this will not be a permanency in my life. I love them, but it's time for normalcy.
Okay, but I want to ask, I want the other candidates, I want you to tell me something that new that you're doing that you actually are glad you started doing. You might not have meant, you would not have asked for the circumstance to force it on you, but something new you've developed that you are going to stick with you. So moving on to Sean for that.
So as I think the other candidates know, because we spend more time with each other than with our families, I am a cat person. I think the only cat person among the candidates, but my wife got a dog when our older son went away to college. And we have been walking the dog through Prospect Park. And as somebody who spent the last 25 years walking through Prospect Park and running through it, because I was a marathoner back when I was much younger, I've discovered whole new parts of the park that are just amazing. And I'm married to a landscape architect, so I've learned a lot of new trees as well.
Great. Diane.
This is a hard one, actually. It's not light like you think it might be, because it's hard to find something. But I think one of the things I found myself doing, because we sit for hours and hours in the Zoom world and in these forums and that kind of thing, is actually I'm sort of grazing more often, right? So I just snack every few hours. I'm having a little something, and it keeps me from actually, sitting and having, meals that are too big that end up making me feel lethargic. And so I guess that's actually a pretty
You might be the
good
only
thing.
person I've met who's eating better or healthier in the pandemic. Congratulations. I love that answer.
I didn't say anything about wine. So,
Catherine.
This is actually a hard one because, to be quite honest with you, I wasn't home during the beginning of the pandemic. I didn't work from home. I was at my office every day like normal, except that I had a couple of extra jobs that I did for more and more hours. So my world stayed pretty similar. I actually lost weight during the pandemic because I wasn't eating all the time, and then transitioned into a Mayoral race, which is 24/7. So I have not developed a hobby at all. I was, working in sanitation and running the food program, and then stepped immediately into running a campaign. So I wish that I had been able to, do sourdough bread or something, but luckily my son's girlfriend has a starter named Edna, and so I do get to partake.
Oh, that's good. Okay, and Ray.
Yeah, this is actually great. Our 20-year-old was drafted first round into the NBA. And so the time that and now he's a starting point guard for the Orlando Magic. Our 18-year-old is away at school. And so that leaves Krista, my wife, and I here with our 8-year-old Leo. And what we have, the hobby that we have is trying to prevent Leo from dunking on me in his room while his mother referees our late night basketball games. And so the agenda the next day is based on who wins in my one-on-one contest with Leo. I won't say that he commits that many flagrant 2 or 3, but I do talk to him about it. But we have a great time. It happens later at night than what one of us would want us to have happen. But that is a great hobby, which I'll extend, but it's now 8:30 and he goes to bed at 9 or 9:30. So that allowed us to get in a quick game.
Great. One of you mentioned how well you've gotten to know each other. And of course, this is the first time that New York will be using this ranked choice system. And so the voters are all being asked to figure out who's their second choice and their third choice and their fourth choice. And so I'm going to ask each of you, who will you put as number 2 on your ballots because you have to do the same thing everyone else has to do. So Sean, who's your number 2 pick for mayor?
So Maya Wiley, and I have been somebody, as you heard, deeply inspired by the civil rights movement, and I have deep respect for the work that Maya has done on civil rights her whole career.
Great. Diane?
I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm not sure that the field has been fully defined. And so I think we've got some time to think about that. It depends on the day. And today I'm just not entirely sure.
Okay. You all certainly will be the best informed of the voters picking your second through fifth choices. Catherine?
Yes, no, I am not ready to pick a second at this time.
Okay, Ray?
I am not yet at the point where I'm prepared to pick a second.
Scott?
This is like an extended family, right? So how do you choose between your left hand and your right hand?
Well, you can actually choose 4 more if you want. You can give us all 4. Give us the whole ballot.
Darn here right now.
I'm not sure, Jody. I'm going that deep, but I will tell you in all seriousness. when you see people night after night, you really see, even though you're competing, you see a lot of great things in the individuals I'm running with. And I think ranked choice voting brings that out. And I really mean that sincerely. I don't want them to win, but I like them a lot. I don't know how we deal with that.
Okay. Moving on. We've got two more questions. So what is the worst job you have ever had? Diane.
The Gap. I worked at the Gap when I was in, it was either that or waiting tables where I was called a spick. I'm not sure which, actually.
At the Gap, were you doing a lot of folding? Was that a big part of the job?
Yeah. Was that a delayed reaction?
Very, very stressful, right? Those folding. Okay, Catherine.
Oh, so I mean, I actually think when I first got out of college, I worked at the Department of Finance and Audit and Enforcement, and realized very quickly that I did not have a future in audit and enforcement, and moved on to go to affordable housing. Though I have to say, my first job at Barnes & Noble, I actually really enjoyed. When it was slow, I got to read the books.
Yeah, my favorite job, I think, was waiting tables. But Ray.
It's a hard choice. It's between digging ditches and changing bedpans.
Oh yeah, those are two. Really fun. Okay, Scott, your worst job.
I was for a short time a stock guy at Macy's. It was literally the guy who just was the general stock person. I was bad at it, but it was great when I got elected borough president. I met the president of Macy's and said, "Hey, I used to work for you." And they got all nervous and saying, "What department?" They thought I was like one of the, and then I said stock.
Was it at the main 34th Street Macy's?
34th Street.
Or whatever. Wow, that's nice. Sean, worst job.
Not that far from Scott. I procrastinated terribly one year finding a summer job, and I ended up at the last minute getting one for Revlon, and figured out that I did not want to spend the rest of my life selling makeup.
But you would do so well selling makeup, because we buy it even in the recessions.
Even I couldn't sell makeup in a recession. I was that bad.
John, I could have been your stock guy. I mean, we could have.
Okay, so our last question is a little more serious and substantive, and I think we're gonna we have come up like a little short on time, or long on time, which is totally new for all of us. I know. So I'm going to give you each a minute to answer this question, and it will also serve as your closing statement. And you'll see that it kind of works as a closing statement, I hope. So we'll go back to the order that's in the chat here: Catherine, Ray, Scott, Sean, and Diane. Is that right? Can we do that, Cheryl? Is that okay? Good. Okay. So the question is, which public figure is your role model or most inspires you as a politician and public servant? And I'm sure there are many, but if you can pick one, that would be great. And you can talk a little bit about how and why they inspire you or are your role model, and maybe how that will play out if you're elected. And you can, as I said, turn that into your opening statement. So we're going to give you a minute, and you'll get your 30-second and 10-second time warnings in the chat if all is working well. So, and we're going to start with Catherine Garcia.
So first, I want to thank you for having me this evening. And I would say I picked pieces of different people. So I think about Eleanor Roosevelt and her ability to really move mountains and see the best in everyone, particularly advocating for people of color and for women. I love Ed Koch's boosterism for the city of New York. We really need that now. And then also the real focus around how do you measure what you're doing? I think those are the things that I think about when I'm mayor, but I intend to be my own person and to redefine what someone in the mayor's chair looks like and is, and break that 400-year glass ceiling.
Terrific. Ray, you're next. What public figure is your role model or most inspires you?
I will say I would have to say two, they're best friends. One is Franklin A. Thomas. And Franklin Thomas, whom you must know, started the Bedfordshire Restoration Corporation and then led the Ford Foundation. And Franklin was the one who negotiated the peace in South Africa. And then yesterday, his best friend, we had a homegoing service for Vernon Jordan. And I was honored to be one of the pallbearers. And as President Clinton said when he utilized Vernon Jordan, and as his daughter, Vicky, celebrated the life of the extraordinary servant on whose shoulders we all stand, and I especially stand. I look at how he was able to convene. I look at how he knew the language of the streets as well as the suites, which is where I pride myself in having that same capacity. And I look at the life that he led, the fullness of the life that he led, and he's impacted all of us. And but for Franklin Thomas and but for Vernon Jordan, none of us would be in the position to run for mayor. None of us would be in the position to convene the way the JCC convened. And so I look at his life and look at the standard that he set, incomparable, indefatigable leadership. And that's the person or two whom I would emulate as I think about public service.
Thank you, and condolences on the loss. Scott.
I had one of the great mentors in my life, and Jerry Nadler, the chair of the Congressional Committee in Washington. I'm so proud of him. Every West Sider is. But I have to say, in addition to Jerry, the person who is my hero, who I very much at times really try to emulate, is the late Senator Robert Kennedy. I think he was a very important figure in our history, someone who started out as a politician, campaign manager for his brother. And at the end of his life in that 1968 presidential campaign, he connected with people of color and the Latino community in an 85-day presidential campaign that still to this day sends chills up my spine. I remember the night he died when I was 8 years old and sat glued to the TV. This was after Martin Luther King died in April, Kennedy died in June. And the first thing I did as an 8-year-old kid was buy every book and try to get every book on Robert Kennedy. I think I've read every single book and document on his life. And I think the lesson that we can take from him, or at least I do, is the best thing you can do is help others and be empathetic. But
You're at time. Thank you. I don't want to be unfair here. Thank you very much. Sean?
Thanks, Jody. I mentioned earlier that 30 years ago this year, I had met John Lewis. As a student, deeply moved by the history of the civil rights movement, a group of friends of mine, and we called his office, and to our great shock, not only did he meet with us, he came and had dinner at a Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C. the night before we left to commemorate the Freedom Rides, just as he'd done 30 years before with the original Freedom Riders. He rode the first mile with us. And I will never forget, in January of 2009, at President Obama's inauguration, the very first person I saw on the platform was John Lewis with a tear rolling down his cheek. And I remember watching President Obama take him by the shoulders and say, "I'm here because of you, John." From not only John Lewis, but President Obama, I've learned crisis after crisis that those who are the most vulnerable before a crisis hits are always hurt the worst by it. So as mayor, I would lead our recovery to not just repair and rebuild this city, but reimagine it as a city that works for everyone.
Thank you, Sean. And last, for our last question, Diane.
So there's two women that come to mind for me, and I think of it as a little bit of like a then and now. Shirley Chisholm is the first sort of pioneer who I can think of, an African-American woman who came from Bed-Stuy and who, defied expectations and refused to allow herself to be defined by others' sort of parameters and boundaries. And I think for me, that is something that rings true for my life's journey. But when I think about today, I think about Cori Bush, quite frankly, someone who has been steadfast in her dedication and commitment to the grassroots, the people's movement, someone who has championed the voice of the community that she comes from, and really has not tried to make herself into something other than who she is. This is, reflective of me because I am also ready to tackle and take on the root causes of our challenges. And I believe a lot of those causes are rooted in racism and white supremacy, and that we have an opportunity right now to make a new choice and to build a new New York City. And so that is what I'm here for, and that's what my candidacy is about.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you, especially the 5 of you who made it with us to the end, but to all the candidates for joining us tonight and for this incredible audience of so many people and who sent us such terrific questions. I think we have learned a ton about these candidates that will help us make our informed choices on June 22nd. Please stay tuned for more programming from the JCC and more journalism from the Forward about these elections that are so critical to the city's future. And I just want to thank again Rabbi Joy Levitt for hosting us and for helping plan this forum along with Ruth Messenger and I, and especially to Cheryl Parker and Austin Readers, who just did all of the hard work to make this happen. You will get in your email tomorrow a video of this program along with all these links. I hope you'll share those with your friends and tell them to make sure to register to vote. You have until May 28th to register to vote. And I think that's all from me. I hope you'll join us for future programs. It's great to partner with the JCC, and it's great to be with all of you. I'm Jody Rujoran. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Forward. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
JCC.
Jody.
Thank you so much.
We'll
Thank
see
you.
you soon.
Be well, everyone.
You too. See you soon.
Thank you, Jody. Big elbow bump to you and everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.